He was hired to clean a mansion, but what he found instead was a woman pretending to be sick, and a loneliness money could never cure. I usually arrived just after sunrise, when the city was still stretching awake. Before that, there was always the same ritual at home. Packing my son's lunch, smoothing his hair while he slept, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead before handing him off to my sister. Those mornings grounded me. They reminded me why I worked carefully, why every small job mattered. The mansion sat at the edge of a quiet hill, gated and distant, like it was trying not to be part of the world around it. From the outside, it was flawless, white stone, tall windows, trimmed hedges. But the moment I stepped inside, the air changed. It was cool, still, carrying the faint scent of disinfectant and expensive flowers that had been replaced too often. The house was clean already, immaculate even, and yet, it felt unused, like a place meant to be lived in but left waiting instead. That was where she lived. I met her on my first day just briefly. She stood at the end of the hallway, wrapped in a soft, pale robe that draped around her like it had been chosen more for comfort than style. Her hair was neatly brushed, silver-threaded brown catching the light. Her face calm but tired in a way that didn't come from sleepless nights alone. She looked healthy at first glance, graceful, composed, but something about her stillness felt fragile, as if she were conserving energy for reasons she didn't explain. "You can start wherever you like," she said gently. Her voice was steady, practiced, but not cold. "I'll be resting." As she turned away, I noticed how slowly she moved, how one hand brushed the wall for balance. Not dramatically, just enough to be noticed if you were paying attention. I told myself it wasn't my place to wonder. I was there to clean, to work quietly, to leave things better than I found them. But the house made that difficult. Every room told a story of wealth without warmth. Framed photos of events she didn't seem to attend anymore. Furniture arranged perfectly, yet never disturbed. In the kitchen, a porcelain teacup sat untouched on the counter, the liquid inside long gone cold. Upstairs, the ticking of a clock echoed too loudly through empty corridors, marking time that no one seemed to be using. I worked slowly, methodically, the way I always did. Still, I felt watched, not in an uncomfortable way, but in the sense that someone was aware of my presence, listening to the sounds of life returning to the house. A vacuum hum, running water, footsteps that weren't hers. When our eyes met again later that morning, it was brief. She stood near the staircase this time, leaning lightly on the railing. There was curiosity there, and something else, relief maybe, as if my being there made the silence less heavy. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled, small and polite. "Thank you for being thorough," she said. I nodded, unsure why my chest felt tight. As she turned away, I realized something unsettled me. Not her illness, not her wealth, but the feeling that this house had been holding its breath for a long time. And somehow, without meaning to, I had just stepped into the pause. By the second week, the house no longer felt quite as distant when I arrived. The gate still opened silently, the floor still shone beneath my footsteps, but something subtle had shifted, like a room that remembers warmth after the fire has gone out. I noticed it most in myself. I stayed a little longer before putting my headphones in. I worked with the quiet expectation that she might appear. She did eventually, not all at once, not suddenly, just a presence at the edge of the day. Sometimes it was the sound of soft footsteps behind me. Other times, her reflection in the glass of a cabinet I was polishing. She never startled me. It was as if she made sure of that. "You have a child," she said one morning, nodding toward my phone resting on the counter. The screen lit briefly with a picture of my son smiling, crumbs on his cheeks. "I do," I replied, surprised she'd noticed. "He's 5. Her expression changed then, warmed, softened. "That explains why you move the way you do," she said thoughtfully. "Careful, like things matter." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I smiled and shrugged. But the words stayed with me longer than they should have. Our conversations were never long, but they grew more frequent. She asked about my day, about my schedule, about whether the work was too much. I asked about the house, how long she'd lived there, whether she preferred quiet mornings or evenings. She answered politely but vaguely, like someone used to protecting parts of herself by omission. I noticed things then. How she often lingered near doorways instead of fully entering a room. How she watched me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, her gaze thoughtful, almost studying. Not my body, but my movements, my patience. And when I caught her looking, she didn't look away quickly. She simply smiled, as if being seen didn't frighten her. One afternoon, she brought tea into the kitchen while I was cleaning. The porcelain cup trembled slightly in her hand. "Would you like one?" she asked. I reached out to take it, our fingers brushing for just a second. The cup was warm. Her hand was warmer. The contact was accidental, brief, but it left something behind. A pause. A shared awareness neither of us named. She sat at the table while I worked, resting her hands around her own cup. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It felt intentional, like sitting beside someone on a quiet train, aware of their presence without needing to fill the space. "I don't usually keep staff long," she said suddenly. "Oh," I replied. "Is that because of your health?" She hesitated. Just a breath too long. "Something like that." The answer didn't quite land. I nodded anyway. As days passed, I began to notice patterns that didn't align with sickness as I understood it. Some mornings she looked radiant, standing straighter, her voice lighter. Other days, after short phone calls or visits from people I never saw clearly, she withdrew completely. Doors closed, curtains drawn. The house returned to its held breath. Still, she always emerged when I was there. Once, as I finished mopping the living room, I felt her standing close behind me. Not intruding, just near. "It's strange," she said quietly. "The house feels less empty when you're here." I turned to face her, unsure what to say. Her eyes held mine, steady and searching, as if she were asking a question she didn't yet have words for. I should have stepped back. Should have reminded myself this was work. That she was my employer. That the distance between us was more than just age or money. Instead, I stayed where I was, and in the space between us, unspoken, warm, and fragile, something began to form. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the first real doubt settled in my chest. The house was quiet again, but not in the familiar, empty way. This time, the silence felt tense, stretched thin. I was wiping down the long hallway table when her voice drifted from behind a closed door. Low, controlled, threaded with something sharp I hadn't heard before. "I understand what you're saying," she said, measured and calm. Then, after a pause, "No, there's no need to adjust anything yet." I hadn't meant to listen. I froze only because something in her tone made me. She didn't sound weak. She didn't sound unwell. She sounded tired, but not fragile. More like someone defending a decision she'd been justifying for too long. When the call ended, I moved again, deliberately louder this time, giving her space. A minute later, the door opened. She stepped into the hallway slowly, one hand brushing the wall as if for balance. But now that I was watching closely, it felt practiced. Her shoulders were straight, her breathing even. Only her eyes betrayed her, distant, unsettled. "Everything okay?" I asked, the question leaving my mouth before I could stop it. She smiled, small and automatic. "Just one of those days." Later that afternoon, it happened. I was cleaning near the staircase when I heard her footsteps falter behind me. Not a dramatic fall, just a soft, unsteady sound. I turned in time to see her sway, her hand reaching for the railing and missing. Instinct took over. I stepped toward her, placing one hand gently at her elbow, the other hovering near her back, careful not to overstep. She leaned into the support without hesitation, her body lighter than I expected, her balance unsteady for only a moment before she found it again. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her fingers curling into the fabric of my sleeve. "I just stood up too fast." Her grip lingered, not tight, not desperate, just there. I could feel the warmth of her through my shirt, the faint rise and fall of her breath. She smelled like something clean and understated. Linen, maybe, or soap. For a second, Neither of us moved. The house seemed to hush around us, as if aware of the closeness. "You don't have to apologize," I said quietly. She looked up at me then, really looked. The practiced calm was gone. In its place was something raw, surprise maybe, or relief at having been caught before she could fall. She stepped back first, smoothing her robe, reclaiming the space between us. "I'll be fine," she said quickly. "I always am." That was when the crack widened. Because I didn't believe her, not entirely. And not because she seemed weak, but because she seemed strong in a way that didn't match the story she'd been telling the world. After that day, I noticed everything. The way her bad days followed certain conversations. How she could sit for hours reading or talking with me, alert and engaged, only to retreat the moment she was alone again. How no medication ever sat out on the counters. How no doctors visited while I was there. And yet, when she walked past me in the hallway, her arm brushing mine just slightly, I felt the same quiet pull as before. Concern tangled with something warmer. Something more dangerous. I told myself I was imagining it. That I was crossing lines that didn't belong to me. But the truth had already begun to surface. And whether I was ready or not, I was standing close enough now that I wouldn't be able to look away. The truth didn't arrive all at once. Came quietly, the way exhaustion does, when holding something in becomes harder than letting it out. It was late afternoon, sunlight slanting through the tall windows, painting the living room in soft gold. I was finishing up for the day, gathering my things, when she spoke from behind me. "Could you stay for a moment?" Her voice wasn't weak. It wasn't commanding either, just honest. I turned to find her sitting on the edge of the sofa, hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't retreated to her room like usual. She hadn't hidden behind distance. That alone felt significant. "I think," she said slowly, eyes fixed on the floor, "you've begun to notice things." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence between us already knew. She exhaled, long and measured, as if bracing herself. "I'm not sick," she said at last. The words were quiet, but they landed heavily. "Not the way people think." Her shoulders relaxed the moment the sentence ended, as if she'd been carrying it physically for years. "I was, once," she continued, "burned out, grieving things I never let myself name, tired of being needed for what I could give, not for who I was." She let out a small, humorless breath. "Being ill gave me permission to disappear, to stop performing." I sat across from her without thinking, careful to keep space between us. She glanced up then, searching my face. Not for pity, but judgment. "You don't have to explain," I said gently. "Only if you want to." Her eyes softened at that. She nodded, swallowing. "People are kinder when they believe you're fragile," she said. "They don't ask as much. They don't push. And eventually, they stop coming." There it was. The loneliness. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just real. She began rubbing her hands together unconsciously, a small, restless motion. Without planning to, I leaned forward and offered mine. Palms open, steady. An invitation, not an assumption. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she placed her fingers against my hand. The contact was light, almost careful. Her skin was warm, her grip tentative, like she was reminding herself how to be held without collapsing into it. I didn't squeeze. I didn't pull her closer. I simply stayed. "I didn't mean for you to get caught in it," she said quietly. "You were just kind, consistent, and that made everything harder." "Because it made things real?" I asked. She nodded. The room felt different after that, less staged, less guarded. Like a house that had finally opened a window. "I don't see you as weak," I said after a moment. "I see someone who was tired of being alone." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Instead, she smiled, small, genuine, relieved. "Thank you," she whispered. We sat there for a while longer, hands still touching, the silence no longer heavy but shared. Outside, the light began to fade, evening settling gently around the house. Nothing about our lives had changed yet. Not the distance. Not the differences between us. But something essential had shifted. The illness had never been in her body. It had been in the emptiness. And for the first time since I'd stepped into that quiet house, it felt like it was finally beginning to heal. After the truth came out, the house felt different, but in ways that unsettled me. It wasn't just lighter, warmer, or more human. It was charged, quietly, like the air before a storm. There were mornings when I arrived and found her already awake, lingering by the window with her coffee, sunlight catching the edges of her hair, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. We began spending more time in the same room, not by plan, but because neither of us could resist it. She would sit at the edge of the sofa while I dusted, or linger in the kitchen doorway while I cleaned. Conversations stretched longer than they had any right to. They were no longer about work or small talk. They were about moments, memories, regrets, about what we'd lost and what we were learning to want again. One evening, the house was bathed in soft golden light. I had finished cleaning the main floor and was about to leave when she appeared at the top of the staircase. She didn't call out. She just leaned on the railing, watching me. "You move differently now," she said softly. "Like you belong here, or like you're settling in, bit by bit." I froze, not because of her words, but because of the way she said them. They weren't teasing, or polite, or distant. They were intimate, careful, personal. Her eyes held mine longer than they should have, searching for something I wasn't yet ready to name. I took a step closer, instinctively, as if my feet moved without consulting my brain. Her gaze didn't waver, and then she did something that changed the rules of the space entirely. She rested her head lightly against my shoulder, just for a moment, brief but deliberate, not tired, not collapsing, simply resting, trusting. The contact was minimal, yet it sent a shock through my chest. I could feel the warmth of her hair against my collarbone, the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing. It wasn't dramatic or clumsy. It was quiet, human, and devastating in its simplicity. We both stayed still. Neither of us moved away. The world narrowed to the soft creak of the stairs, the faint hum of the city outside, and the small pulse of connection between us. It was more than proximity. It was recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that something had begun. Something that neither of us fully understood or were ready to admit, but that could no longer be ignored. Pulling back slightly, she brushed her hands against her robe, composed herself and smiled, small and wary. "I should go," she said. I nodded, though I didn't step back entirely. "If you want," I said softly. "You don't have to move away." She paused, and for a heartbeat it felt like she might stay, linger just a little longer. But then she turned and walked back down the hallway, leaving the space charged, full, and trembling with what was unsaid. I realized then that the line had already been crossed, quietly, invisibly, in a brush of hair against skin, in a shared pause, in a trust that had been granted without words. The tension between us had shifted. It was no longer just employer and worker, observer and patient. It was something more fragile, more dangerous, more compelling. And yet neither of us spoke it. Not yet, because acknowledging it too soon could destroy everything. So instead, we moved closer in silence, letting proximity, glances, and lingering touches speak for the words we weren't ready to say. And in that careful, restrained space, the slow burn of something real and inevitable began to grow. Expand Keynote 6, 500 Words, Part 6. Choosing honesty over fear. The tension between us had been simmering for weeks, a quiet heat that neither of us dared fully name. I kept thinking about the invisible line we'd crossed, the brush of hair against my shoulder, the lingering pauses, the way she watched me when she thought I wasn't noticing. But now the quiet had grown too heavy, too urgent, to ignore. It happened one evening as the sun was setting, spilling amber light across the living room. She was sitting on the sofa, her knees tucked under her, reading a book I'd noticed she'd left unfinished the week before. I hesitated in the doorway, cleaning supplies in hand, unsure whether I was intruding or if I even wanted to leave yet. She looked up, catching my hesitation. "You can sit," she said softly, patting the cushion beside her. Her smile was small, patient, as if she already knew what I was holding back. I set the supplies down and joined her. The air between us was thick, but it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like anticipation, like two people standing on the edge of a truth they both feared. "I need to tell you something," I said, my voice low. I swallowed, feeling my chest tighten. "I care about you, more than I should. And maybe that's foolish age circumstance. It doesn't matter. But I can't pretend I don't notice you, that I don't feel." I trailed off, the words too heavy to finish. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, her gaze fixed on me, steady and calm. And then, after a long pause, she spoke. "I care about you too," she admitted, voice trembling ever so slightly. "I haven't felt alive in years. I was scared. Scared of what it meant. Scared of being judged. Scared of losing the only control I have left over my life." Her fingers twisted in her lap. You make it feel safe to want something again. To feel something real." The weight of her words settled over me. For a moment, the room felt suspended, as if even the walls were holding their breath. I wanted to reach out, to close the space between us, but I hesitated. I wanted this to be honest, not a rush of impulse. She moved then, slowly, deliberately. One hand rose to cup my cheek, thumb brushing lightly along my jaw. The touch was careful, measured, yet electric in its restraint. It said everything she couldn't put into words. The trust, the longing, the quiet fear that what we felt might be impossible. I leaned into her hand instinctively, feeling the warmth of her skin, the softness of her touch. When her lips brushed my cheek, a kiss so fleeting and gentle that it could have been mistaken for a whisper. It sent a shiver through me, a promise without pressure. We sat there for a long time, words unnecessary. The space between us no longer felt like distance. It felt like possibility. Finally, she spoke again, softer this time. "We'll take it slow, carefully, honestly, together." I nodded. Relief, anticipation, and something deeper, a sense of home, flooded through me. For the first time, the fear of what others might think didn't matter. We had chosen honesty over hesitation, vulnerability over pretense. And in that choice, the slow burn of our connection turned into something tangible, something we could both hold without breaking, something real. We weren't rushing. We weren't pretending. We were simply together. Time passed slowly, as if the house itself had learned to breathe again. The heavy curtains stayed drawn less often. Sunlight spilled across the floors in long, golden streaks, and the walls no longer seemed to hum with quiet loneliness. Life was returning to the mansion, but not as it had been before. Now it carried warmth, laughter, and a quiet rhythm that was ours. She emerged from the self-imposed isolation she had lived in for years. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, a soft reclamation of herself. Adjusting the blinds to let light in, choosing her own meals again, even attending small social events she had once avoided. And through it all, I was there, not as a cleaner, not as an observer, not as someone merely present, but as someone she had chosen to share this journey with. One Saturday afternoon, I watched her from the kitchen doorway. My son was in the living room, laughing as he chased a small toy across the rug, and she sat on the sofa, her eyes following him with quiet delight. The lines of tension I had seen in her face for so long were softened, replaced by something far more enduring: ease, contentment, a sense that she could finally just be herself, unguarded, in the house she had once used to hide from the world. I crossed the room slowly, mindful of her presence. She looked up, smiled, and patted the space beside her on the sofa. I sat, letting our shoulders brush lightly. No words were necessary. The comfort between us had become a language of its own. Her hand found mine, fingertips threading together almost unconsciously. I could feel the warmth of her palm, the subtle pressure of her grip, and the slow, steady rhythm of her heartbeat beneath her skin. It wasn't dramatic or urgent, just real, steady, safe. "I never imagined it could feel like this," she said softly, eyes fixed on the sunlight spilling across the floor. "Like home. like someone is really here with me. You're not alone anymore, I said quietly, tightening my hold just slightly. And you don't have to be. The house, once so still and cold, now carried the hum of life. The ticking of the clocks no longer echoed ominously. They simply marked time, a gentle reminder that we were moving forward, together. Later, as evening approached, we stood by the large window in the living room. She leaned into me, her head resting lightly against my shoulder, fingers entwined with mine. Outside, the city carried on, indifferent to the quiet triumph of this small, intimate space. But inside, everything had shifted. Not cured by money, not saved by youth, but by trust, by patience, and by the slow, deliberate choice to be honest and present for one another. I watched her glance down at my son, laughing in his playful innocence, and then back at me, her eyes warm, open, and free. There was a softness there that had never existed before, a quiet joy that came from knowing she could finally let herself live without pretense. I pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, and she rested her cheek against mine. The house held us in its quiet embrace, and for the first time, it felt like a real home. We didn't need grand declarations or dramatic gestures. We had something far more powerful. A shared life, built slowly, carefully, honestly. A love that had grown through patience, through understanding, and through the quiet act of being there for one another. And as the last light of the day settled over us, I realized something I had known all along. This was exactly where we were meant to be. Together, whole, and finally at peace. If you enjoyed this slow burn, age gap romance, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story of love, healing, and unexpected connections. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you discovered the truth behind someone's guarded heart?